Hello, everybody. Glad you could join us for episode number 45 of the Launch and Beyond podcast, a podcast designed to support you in not only achieving great success in your business, but in all other areas of life as well. A few episodes ago, we recorded a podcast called Bottlenecks, Bureaucracy and Politics, and we received a huge number of people reach out to us thanking us for recording that episode. Specifically, it struck a chord with a lot of our listeners who were able to identify particular obstacles that have shown up in their businesses and the impact that it had and was having in an ongoing manner. Well, if you took a lot out of that episode, you're going to love this one because we go another step further. This week, we discuss the contradictions in your life and business, in the way you think, the way you act and communicate, which may be having a massive impact and effect in both your business and in life. Hold on to your hats because this one's really going to challenge you. We hope you enjoy it. Okay, so Adam, we've got a big topic today called contradictions, and it's going to trigger a lot of people. And I just want from the outset to declare that there's no righteousness in any element of what we say today. It's really about helping people to identify the contradictions in their life that may be causing them some of the challenges. And it's only when they are aware of those and take ownership of those that things will change. So we all have them. We all have contradictions in our lives. We say one thing and our behaviors say something else. They say, this is a priority, and then your behaviors don't support that. So just I guess as a disclaimer from the outset that you may be really pissed off at what comes up through here. And yet if we're doing our role, if we're doing what we're doing the way we had intended, it's about transformation and breakthrough stuff. So it will be a little bit uncomfortable. If you take the learning and grow from it, it could really serve you well.
Yeah, it's one of those things that if you don't live congruent with yourself, you start tearing yourself down inside.
Yeah,
and that's where the contradictions come in. And I've seen it. I've dealt with it. Feel like I've moved forward through it, and I'm at the point now that where I can go, yeah, well, I'm not embarrassed. I don't regret that. I live by that decision. It wasn't the best decision, but I live by it. I'm comfortable enough to keep moving forward without letting that eat me up inside. Whereas in my younger days, I would do something that would contradict my morals, but I would just do it and then it'd start eating me up. And that's the funny story of how Sal and I started talking, because I did something I didn't want to do that ate my morals. And then he was, for one reason or another, I don't know why, but he was the person I reached out to, and he came in and he goes, you know what? Stop doing that. And it was like a big slap in the face, and that's what I needed. And look where it got us. We got him on the podcast. We had a good session with him, and now I live my life a lot more without contradictions, more congruently.
Yeah. So this is today's really about shining a light on that as a topic, or bringing up a mirror to someone and go, hey, just letting you know, because it's really hard when you want to support someone to make good decisions or live a life, and they tell you this is what I want to do. You're in that awkward scenario. It's like, do I tell them what they should be doing? Are they looking for advice, or what are they looking for? And sometimes it's just drawing it for people to understand that, hey, you're saying one thing, that this is a priority, but you're behaving in a totally different way. So that contradiction is either going to get you, let me rephrase that. Is it going to get you any closer to what it is that you want? More often than not, no. So by having that awareness and reconciling those contradictions, you'll find you'll get better, faster outcomes and more fulfilling outcomes because they're more congruent with what you want. Yeah. So I'll give you an example particularly. And from the outset, like just to give people an example, I go, well, what's an example of a contradiction? Well, a contradiction could be, let's say you run a business and you promote and you advocate that you're an equal opportunity employer, that everybody has an opportunity to ascend through the ranks of the company. And yet when you do a profile of them, they're all of one gender or one race. And so the subconscious message you're giving is, we're saying one thing, but it's not being expressed in our results or outcomes. And so that is a contradiction in a lot of ways. So what you say and what you do, and there could be a perfectly legitimate reason for that. But it's basically identifying that what subtle message are you giving out to both yourself and to the world when you behave and act basically different to what you say.
Yeah, and this is why I find my job is really easy when I do sales, is because I believe in my products and I don't contradict it. So
Mm,
whatever I'm saying about the product, I can sell it because it's true.
mm,
And I don't contradict. I don't go, hey, look how good this is, and then I do something and it breaks apart in my hand, and I'm going, well, that wasn't
mm.
good. That's embarrassing. I don't live like that much. As much as I can afford to. Sometimes it just happens, but as much as we as much as I can do it, I don't contradict myself
Mm.
because it leads you down a deep dark hole, and then people start losing trust in you. They go, he says one thing, he does a
Yeah.
completely different other thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we have the capacity to change our mind and change our opinion,
Mm.
and so and we're going to touch on this specifically because what impacts contradictions have is as you said, the trust is a big factor. But it's okay, to say, look, based on what I knew then, this is what I thought.
Mm.
Now I've understood things a little bit deeper, a little bit better, and as a result of that, I've changed my mind. There's difference, but there's a big distinction in the contradictions to say this is how it is, and then you do the total opposite of that because that's it's incongruent, it's out of integrity, it's all these things, but that's the disconnect that occurs for people in there. So to me, it's like when you see someone say, yes, I used to think this. I changed my mind because of more information, more data that came to light, and as a result of that, I've changed my thinking. I think you can adapt and you can accept that.
Yeah.
But the contradictions are when people say and do things that are differently. You go, nah, I'm calling that out, right?
But I find the majority of people have lost how to be able to communicate because of social media and avenues like this. Because if you're on social media and you're saying one thing and you're living a different way, people are like, oh, that's a bit weird. But then if they took time to actually sit down and send you a message and go, hey, why did you post that? And you rationalize it, or you go, these are the reasons, this is the research I've been looking at recently, this is the opinion I've formed recently. And they go, oh, well, at least you've made an informed decision. They might look at it and start looking at your research or what you've been looking up and go, hey, actually, that's changing my mind now as well, because they don't need to necessarily support what you've posted, but they go, it's changed my mind because now I can see that there's no contradiction. Initially, I made a story in my mind going, this is why he's posted this, but I didn't know the background to it. So it looks like it's externally a contradiction, but once you go in and you have a conversation and you talk about it, you go, oh, actually, you've made an informed decision. It's what you believe. Doesn't necessarily mean it's what I believe, but now I know there's no contradiction. You just didn't execute it properly or something like that.
Yeah. No, I get that. Adam, that's spot on there. And I think that I'd love to talk about some of the impacts that contradictions have in your life, because when they're presented, there's 6 things that I've identified as impacts of having contradictions in your life. So number 1 will be that it causes you not to trust yourself. So if you've got contradictions in your own world, you'll call yourself out. You'll basically say, yes, this is what I say I'm going to do, and this is what I do. And that disconnect means that you don't have enough references, enough credits, enough deposits in your self-esteem and your follow-through account to feel that you're trustworthy. So you won't trust yourself in scenarios like that. So it erodes your own self-esteem, your self-trust, and you're not likely to back yourself in those scenarios. We've talked a lot about how important self-trust is in making powerful decisions, but if you're with the person who is saying one thing and acting out, after a while you're not going to back yourself.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you're going to have that same effect with other people. So if you're doing it for yourself, if you contradict yourself, you're also going to lose trust that other people could have in you. They're not going to trust your word and your action lining up. So consequently, what that's going to do, number 3, is going to create uncertainty and confusion. So people aren't going to know, do they mean that? Are we going in this direction? How fully committed are they to that? I'm not really clear. So you give mixed messages, you give contradictory information. Number 4 is that it's going to cause you to underperform, because you're not going to be all in. You're not going to be fully engaged in a direction or a decision that you have, and you're not going to follow it through. You're not going to see the outcome of it because you haven't got momentum in that particular direction. So that's going to cause that as well. Point number 5 is it's going to cause a lot of stress and angst in relationships and communication and your capacity to impact and influence other people as well, because contradictory information, mixed messages can create confusion, uncertainty. You don't have the solidity, you don't have the process to go through. And number 6 is that you do tend to get stuck. You see that as a result of all that, people become disempowered, they get stuck, and they tend to adopt quite a victim mindset where they don't feel like they're in control of things. They quite often feel at the effect of things.
Yep. There's a few points in there, and I can see that I've done a few of them. Like
we all have, right?
Yeah.
So, like I said, that's why I wanted to declare at the start, because when I reflected on this, I went, okay, what's one of the biggest things that stops people, me included, everybody, is the contradictions. And so, full respect to, if you'd gone, no, I don't do any of them, I go, mate, I got to call bullshit on that, because we all do.
Yeah.
Right. So tell me about.
But I believe that's why people are further along in their self-development, their personal growth, is because they actually take back all the filters, take back all the layers, and they cut it back down to the core and go, do I do this? Yes or no? Have I done this in the past? Yes or no? And if you say yes to a negative thing, that's you being open and honest with yourself. That means that you can start moving forward. If you're saying no to something that's negative, but you know you've kind of done it, that's the internal contradiction that we're talking about. That starts building distrust in yourself. That starts you telling yourself a story, as you've told us before in the past. You start telling yourself these stories, and you build a person that you're not actually you're not actually that person, and then you try and fix the person that you're not actually, and then you start getting like in point 6. You go, well, I've done all this work, but I'm in the victim mindset now. I can't change. It must just be how I am, and that's because you're not. You've got these contradictions. You've built this story because you haven't been honest with yourself, and you can't shine the lights on the negative parts. And it's fine to have negative parts. We're all human. But if you can objectively assess who you are, that's the way that you'll start forging your way forward and moving forward and building that better, stronger person. And like, I see this and I think of fitness and athletes. I'm like, what you have to do is in training, in jiu-jitsu, the more you sweat on the mat, the less you bleed in battle. So this mindset, I look at it and I think of jiu-jitsu. I'm sitting there on the mat. The more I sweat, the more reps I do, the more I push out, the more confidence I build in myself. When I go out to a tournament or to showcase my skills, I don't produce blood. I don't get in a position that I'm not sure how to get out of, because I've already got that clarity. I've already got that certainty and confidence in myself. But that wasn't always the case. When I was first started jiu-jitsu, this is 12 years ago, then before my break, I would just go through the motions and I wouldn't have confidence in our teacher, Sensei Barker, Sensei Frank. He would say, let's do tournaments. Let's do this. Let's do that. And I'm like, yeah, no, it was always the big, macho 18-year-old, 17, 18, 19-year-old going, I won't tap if I'm in a position. I'll rather snap my arm. But it was more the fact that I didn't have the confidence in my toolbox, as we say, or my repertoire in jiu-jitsu to go and compete against others. So I find it works well in an athletic point of view for me.
Yeah, definitely. And there's some areas of life that we'll look at a little bit later on. But you're 100% correct in terms of like the contradiction, particularly within an athlete, a professional athlete, would be you say you're a professional athlete, but you're not preparing like a professional athlete, so you're not sleeping, you're not eating properly, you're not doing the reps, you're not doing that. So you're telling me that you want to be number one in the world, whatever that is, in whatever your sport is, but your behaviors, your actions, your mindset aren't congruent and consistent with what you said you were going to do as a result of getting there. So can you see the disconnect? Because a lot of the times people, they rationalize it. They rationalize that and say, oh, look, it's not that bad, or I want to do, but they're the justifications. And we've mentioned it in previous podcasts about the above the line, below the line. Well, this is what we call below the line, where you're justifying and finding reasons and excuses not to follow through with what you said you've done. And that's your call. But the contradiction will be is that you're expecting a result and not actually putting in the effort, time, energy that's required in there. But more importantly, you believe that that's appropriate. That's what the contradiction is all about.
Well, at the start of every journey, when you're going into a field where you don't know much about, there's a saying, fake it till you make it. You can fake it till you make it, but in the background, you got to do some work. You can't just constantly living in that fake it till you make it situation. You've got to do the work and build it. And you might fool people for the first 2 months, first 3 months, first 2 weeks, but eventually they're going to catch on and they're going to go, this guy, he said one thing, but I don't think it's working. And that's where the distrust from others comes in.
Yeah.
And then that happens, then you start getting distrust in yourself. Sometimes it happens outside before it's inside. So, yeah.
So I have 3 big statements around that I think is going to set the tone and the intention for the podcast as well. And I want to read those out here. And that is, number 1, in large part, the key to success and fulfillment in both business and life is the process of identifying and reconciling contradictions in your life, right? So when we break that statement up, it's a little bit about what you just said, where it's the process of, number 1, being honest with yourself and identifying that, okay, this is where I'm learning myself down, or this is what I'm saying is important to me. And once again, it's not about somebody else, me, Adam, telling someone that you have to do this, because I avoid doing that at all costs for people, to the point where, it's not an empowering process. So I'm more inclined to go, hey man, you told me that this is a priority. I'm calling crap because you're not doing this. Now, this is not about me telling you what you have to do, but it's about saying to me, you told me this is a priority. Is it still a priority? Because how you're going about it isn't going to serve you. It's not for me to decide whether this is right. And the moment people have that realization, they go, okay, right, I got it, right? And the moment they're aware of that, then they'll go, okay, what do I need to clean up? And because this is what I found, when you tell someone what they have to do, they'll resent you for it, right? But if you actually find a way of breaking through the bubble, the veneer of lies or story that they're building around that and get to core truth, that's when you get transformation and change. But unless you get there, you basically, it's being deflected.
Well, as a coach or consultant, mentor, whatever, if you see someone's downfall and you tell them straight out, as you just said, it gives them another reason to go, no, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know me. And you're like, but this is what you've just asked me to do. And then all of a sudden you're the aggressor, you're the agitator. And then they play that victim mentality. Again, they go back into their shell. Oh, this guy. And then they put distrust into you, even though really you've told them what needs to be done, but you haven't empowered them, as you've just said. And then they look outside, because it's a lot easier to look outside than it is to look inside.
Yeah. I have a lot of people who come to me to work with me because I am decisive. I am clear. But what confuses them a lot of the times is they mix that up with the drill sergeant, because a lot of people, because of the high, by definition, I've been an alpha male most of my life. And so people expect that that's I'm a one-trick pony. And yet a lot of the times they come in expecting, okay, all right, man, you're going to smash me. I'm like, why do I have to do that? And that throws people off, because they suddenly go, okay, I'm prepared for it. And you basically blindside them by going, hey, man, just before we start, just let me know, why do you need to get whipped every time? I mean, why is somebody beating you over the head, convincing you this is important, necessary for you to take action? This is your life, not mine. Why should I care about it more than you do? And that totally messes with people. So suddenly it's like, okay, and then you can get to their compelling drives and reasons. So if you have, and this is what I found, if you've got someone who's a drill sergeant, you'll always need a drill sergeant. You'll always need it. You never find full empowerment. But if you can find a way to internalize the drive and have someone to keep you accountable in any way that looks, then you'll be able to do that. But you've got to reconcile the contradiction initially to say that this is a priority, but I'm not giving it the priority status because I'm putting the power out of myself to somebody else.
Yeah, well, humans are definitely like creatures of habit. So however they deal with the situation, they go, well, this has worked for me before in the past, so I'll keep doing that. And as they come up to a drill sergeant, they expect it and they're ready. And, they've embraced, they've embraced, it's combative, and they've embraced for it and they're ready. And then you've just gone, no, how about we do this?
Mm.
And then they as you said, they take a step back, but that's positive because now their mind's a bit more open. They're not that defensive. Like normally they'd come up and they're defensive. They're like, oh, I know how to do this. I've done this so many times. And it doesn't have to be in that aggressive, like drill sergeant. You know, if it's a bit more of a finesse, you've spoken about it with Tony Robbins, you know, the pattern interruptions.
Yeah.
So if they're used to that feminine, approach, and I don't use that as in, female, male, like there's the softer approach. Yeah, femininity. The softer approach. And then they get the drill sergeant. You've just interrupted their pattern. Now that they're open because they're like, oh, I don't know how to deal with this. They start assessing a few more things, and that's when they get that empowerment that you're talking about. Yeah, pattern interrupt.
Yeah, I've seen it happen so many times, and particularly in my life, and I've shared it in the podcast before that maybe it was my stubborn male ego that would butt up against that kind of energy, but it would just never be a motivating force. It'd be, I'd block that out. And so all transformation, so it got to the point where every person around me who had a lot of my coaches, I had one fantastic coach who I've shared before, John, who was very drill sergeant-esque, but he never went there with me because he never needed to. He was clever enough and smart enough that that's not how you motivate him. But for me, most of them have been women and solid women who are certain in themselves, but went about it. So I didn't feel like I had to have my defenses up. So they were able to help me get to realizations and truths that I wasn't allowing anybody else to get to because of the blockades that I was putting up. So, that was a big learning for me.
Yeah.
Right? The second statement I'm going to read out is the process of reconciling contradictions may mean being totally honest with yourself, acknowledging a specific contradiction is present in your life and making a commitment to change it. So you can do that by yourself, but most times people don't always get to core honesty and truth with themselves because like you said earlier on, they may have a story around a particular type of scenario. So being able to get to that core truth is the thing. And sometimes you've got to get to do the breakdown to get the breakthrough. And that's happened for a lot of people when they can see the impact and cost of a decision, a contradictory way of living their life and what it's costing them. When they feel that pain, they feel that hurt at the deepest level, that's when they're inspired and motivated to change.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast earlier and it had a Navy SEAL in it, and he was talking about how people overthink too many things. It's like with the training in Hell Week, which is 135 hours no sleep, and they run all these tasks, and they're quite physical, obviously, but they're really uncomfortable, cold, wet. They have lots of food, but you've got to run, I think, 3 miles to get to the food and come back. So you can eat whatever you want. You can have pizza, pasta. So it's a good life in that sense. But a lot of the people in their minds, they start playing games, and that's where they lose themselves. It's, for instance, one of the nights in the Buds, I think it's the first night, after a full day of like intense, crazy yelling and that drill sergeant, they go into the water and they sit there linked arms and it goes silent. And that's where people start playing the games in their mind, and they start telling themselves the story. Oh, I can't do this for 5 more days. They start breaking themselves down mentally, but they don't think about it rationally because they're in such a broken down state. If they go, well, it's just tonight and then I'll make it. And then it's just tomorrow night. And then, this is what the Navy SEAL was saying. He goes, we had to run a mile up and a mile back. We didn't know how many miles we had to run. It was on our own pace. We could be walking it if we wanted to. But all I was thinking about is I got to complete this mile. Then I got to do the next mile. And then I got to do, and you build that trust because all you're thinking about is small little increments. You're not contradicting yourself. You're not going, hey, I've got to run 20 miles, but I don't know the breakdown. And you start playing games with yourself. And I see that's how a lot of people like contradict themselves. They think differently to what a situation is. They make up a story and then they're trying to, it's hard to explain. They make up a story of a situation and they tackle it that way. When in actual fact, if you break it down to a step-by-step process, it makes it a lot more easy. it's like making. I'm rambling on, but I'm just trying to say, if you make a list of, you can do this either internally. So if you want to talk about your personality, your mindset, all this, if you make a list of how you want to live your life, you do it step by step. I use fitness because that's what I'm into at the moment. Is I want to run that next kilometer. That's when I did the half marathon. I was saying, how did my body react to this kilometer? How did it react to the next kilometer? And I was doing running assessments. If you want to do this for your mindset and your personality, what you do is, what's the person you want to be? And then write a step what that person would do. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't look outside that. This is affecting me. That's it. No. What would that person that you want to be do? And then you write your list and you move forward.
Yeah.
So I think I've butchered that, but that's
what I'm taking out of that is the integrity, or the part linking it back to what you just said, is plan the work the plan. And if it is something that is important, then you need to ensure that your habits and behaviors are in alignment with what you said is important and a priority, and what you said you do. So that's really that's what I took out of what you were saying.
Yeah, that's the short way of the long way that I went around.
The short course. That's cool. So, but it supports exactly what you're basically saying, Adam. That's the process of going about that. And the third statement I wanted to make about the contradictions is that quite often we only identify the impact that they have on us when we get to core truth and then future pace them in a scenario, a situation over days, weeks, months and years, and see the impact that that's going to have in your life and world, right? So I remember years ago, the first time I did Unlimited Power Within, Tony Robbins' seminar, which changed my life, right? He runs what's called the Dickens process, where it's like how they talk about the memory of Christmas past and future. And so what he does is he runs you through this process where you identify with core truth and the pain that it causes. And then he runs through a scenario where he says, okay, well, if this doesn't change, what's going to happen over next week, next month, next year? And to the point where it's intolerable, you're going, man, my heart's going to explode because this is so painful. So and then it brings you back to this present moment and says, okay, you have choice. And this is like a sliding doors moment. You could either keep doing what you're doing or you can change. And having that awareness to realize that what you're saying and doing are different things, and making a decision to create change is one of the most empowering exercises to go through. So that, to me, is really, really important, where the contradictions today may not have an impact, but the contradictions and the impact of those played out over time, that's when it starts putting you on a different trajectory and gets you different outcomes to the ones you may want. And so that's when it really heightens it. Okay, so look, it was a powerful exercise. And to be in a room with like 4,000 people bursting into tears, realizing that I don't want this, is a really, really powerful process. And you're going through your own stuff, but then you're aware of what else is going on and you realize, okay, this is pretty powerful. So really, really powerful.
It's like the should have, could have, would have type stuff. It's, I could have had a business. I could have been my own boss, and then you were living a life that's just comfortable and easy, and you're not happy, but you're just doing it because that's the normal, that's comfortable, that's what you know. And then to sit down in a room of people who are there for genuinely better purposes, you feel it, you feel that energy, and all of a sudden you've got this realization. You look deep inside because you're like, how come that person's having a breakthrough but I'm not? And that's why sometimes in a group situation this works better, because you're like, how come that person's having a breakthrough and I'm not? It's because you're still living in that story that you tell yourself. Once you see that they're having a breakthrough and that person's having, and they're having, then you start actually really deep diving in, and then all of a sudden you get choked up. And it might not be because you're depressed. It's just, you're just letting out all this built up tension and energy, and it just comes to the surface. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is what I've got to do. Because you've all of a sudden centered yourself. You've aligned your beliefs to yourself, and you move forward and you trust yourself again. You're like, all right, I see it so clear now. But it was so helpful to have a room full of people who were there to support me, coming from a love. They're wanting to better themselves, and they're not looking down on you in that situation because they're looking inside.
Yeah. So that's where anybody who does group work is lifted up by the power of the group. And, and there is definitely something empowering when you've got a big environment. That's part of the reason why I go and do a lot of the retreats, and really excited. So I'm going again in March next year with Matt and Clinton, who we've had on our podcast episode before. Being on crew with them again, and that's what I find is when I'm in those environments, it allows me to contribute, but it also allows me to reflect on my own life and go, okay, well, where am I not expressing this in its highest and best use, or where am I being contradictory in between my actions and my behaviors, or where do I need to lift my game and level up and step up and really go for it when I'm challenging somebody to do that, and I'm not doing it myself. So that's the context, and that's why I'm looking forward to being back with the guys again in March in Queensland.
Yeah, well, from a young age, I was teaching karate to younger students when I was 13 years old, 14 years old. And again, this is an athletic example, but for me to learn exactly why I do a move in order to teach it to a younger person, it started making me be a better martial artist, because I knew that perfect angle that my wrist needed to be so I wouldn't snap my wrist. Because you see kids punching however, and you're like, no, you got to stop that. You're going to break your wrist. And then you sit down and you explain technically, you got to slightly twist it. You got to hit with the two knuckles. You want your wrist straight. And then you start understanding the process even more. So I find that being a contributing member to a group allows you to deep dive more into yourself or into thought process, because you go, I need to understand this before I can really get it out. And that's why when I was saying before, I've just started rambling, because some of these things I don't fully grasp until I thought about it. And now that I'm talking about it a bit more, I understand exactly how I want to word these situations and scenarios, and I can see, all right, now this is where I can give my best opinion or my best view on this topic.
Cool. So let's go next step with this, Adam. And in the past, we've looked at, different areas of life, and we want to look at the impact of contradictions in different parts of your life and what effect they have. And so we've identified 6 areas of life that we're going to apply this filter through. And the first area of them is in your health. Okay, so the overarching question we want to ask everybody to reflect on is, what contradictions are showing up in your health? And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So the contradiction will be, imagine, you're meticulous about what you put in your mouth. You're meticulous about measuring everything. You know the macro breakdown, whether you're vegan, whether you're paleo, whether you're doing all of that, you put such a high priority on the quality of food, that it's organic, that you've got no chemicals, right? And yet you've got a 15 cigarette a day habit. Right? So once again, from the outset, there's no judgment here, but can you see the disconnect between one form of obsession and something else, which, like, most people will go, dude, don't you know that smoking increases your risk on so many levels? Why are you doing that? And why are you putting such a big emphasis on? So sometimes people will try and over control one area to justify what else they're doing, right? But there's a contradictory lifestyle approach where you're advocating and saying health is really important to me, and yet I do this.
What did I say to you before we started the podcast? As I cracked the gin and tonic open,
I think you said, listen, I'm seriously considering not drinking again.
Yeah.
And I went, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was because, and what was the reason I gave to you?
Well, you said, look, and a lot of it is I enjoy it. I find that I love that you've got a lot of emotional connection to drinking, the socialization, the freedom, whatever. But what you realize is in yourself, once you're going down that hole, that path, I should say, not the hole, the path, you lose sense of restraint.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't allow you to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, it doesn't best serve me.
Yeah. And so but that would be, and I'm being totally transparent here. If I could see that was affecting your path, me as a friend, as a co-host would go, hey, dude, do what you're doing, but I just got to let you know that this is really affecting what's going on here. And you're putting a lot of energy and effort here, but can you see that you're letting yourself down here?
Yeah.
Right. So this is what I mean by this is going to piss people off. And it's not intended to, there's no righteousness here, but it's just to be go, hey, I'll be the bloke. They say angels go where fools fear angels fear to tread. And I'm that guy who actually says, hey, man, I care about you. I really care about you. You told me this is a priority, but can you see how this and this don't match up? And can you see what impact that's having in your life and world?
Yeah, and because my sister got married last week, I took the week off that week. And then, it was the come down. We still had family here from interstate and all this. So we're going out to dinners and drinks. And then I think it was on Thursday, I sat down and I go, you know what? I really feel like there's a cloud over my head. From coming from 75 days of clean, highly functioning, my body and health was prime and pristine. I was in the best physical condition I've been in, I think, in my whole life. And then to come into like eating takeaways, eating restaurant meals, eating and drinking, I felt this cloud. And I messaged a few people and I go, I don't know how people can live like this. And I'm not being judgmental. I'm trying to understand, because I'm like, I feel so low in vibrations. I feel like I'm not myself. I feel like I can't perform at my best anymore. And I'm like, so what's the option? Do I just give it up? And I'm drinking a gin and tonic as I'm holding and talking about this, but do I give it up and say, well, this is the last weekend and I'm just going to go until I don't go? Sort of like how I did my vegan diet. I just started and I said, you know what? I don't see the purpose in the meat or the dairy, and I'm just going to try it and see how long I last.
Yeah.
And it's been almost 3 years.
But some people need that they've got an absolute response. They have to go there because they realize that the moment that I'm down that path, I make different decisions that then lead me to other decisions. And so for some people, they've got that self-restraint, self-control. Sometimes, but other people need double white lines built around them. There's plenty of people that I know who may have an addiction to one way, shape or form. They've got to build systems around that addiction, and they've got to have a zero policy, because no level is a comfortable level. No level is tolerable. And so they know in themselves. And so there's elements of my behavior that has to be absolute, because I know that if I go to that next stage and level, I lose control, right? So that's the realization that I've had over myself. And they're the contradictions that I realized. And the action is the response to core truth.
Yep.
Right. So that's really what that was. So, and I give you, there's examples that come in there, but I'll give an example within the health context, because that's my background. There's so many times how many health providers advise, lecture, tell people how to look, how do people to live their lifestyle, what they should be eating, and yet they don't exemplify, I should say, those examples themselves. They're not healthy. They're not fit. They're basically got horrible lifestyle factors and choices, and yet they're in a position to advise people on how to live their life. That's incongruent. That's a contradiction in themselves. And I know we talked about what impact that has. What message does that give to you as a client, patient, consumer, when you look at this person and go, dude, you're out of integrity. How can you tell me that I should be looking after my health when you look like you're just barely just getting by yourself?
Yeah, that brings an idea to me. There's 3 speakers that I'm going to say: Eric Thomas, Les Brown, Andy Frisella. All of them overweight. At one point in their lives, not currently, but at one point. And they were up there motivationally speaking to people, you've got to change this, you've got to do that. And then they looked in their self and they go, I'm overweight. I should be on that diet that I keep telling, I keep saying to that guy, put the cheeseburger down, but I'm still eating that cheeseburger. And they go, I'm telling you what to do, but I'm not doing myself. So then Eric Thomas would do 2 miles every morning before he would do anything. And then, Les Brown went and lost his weight. And then Andy's got the 75 hard challenge. But they saw that they were telling people what to do, but they weren't doing it themselves. So then they started feeling like a fraud almost. And again, they weren't being congruent. They were just preaching, but they weren't following that lifestyle. And then they were getting hate in their talks because they're like, you're telling me to lose weight, but you look like that. Or they were doing that personal work. They were reflecting on themselves and they were going, actually, I can't keep telling people to do it if I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And that's where they change their mindset.
And this is what I mean by the contradictions and the righteousness, because someone in that genre, Oprah,
Yeah.
right? She was always honest and transparent with her struggles in that area. And that endeared people to her because they saw that she was actually being transparent in that regard. So that you get trust. That's what I'm talking about. But people won't listen and buy in and follow you if you're giving contradictory messages. And as you exemplified in the three speakers that you shared, they may have had a great message, but one of my favorite speakers, Jim Rohn, always said that people don't buy the message until they buy the messenger. And if you've got zero street cred because you're contradictory and you're basically not integrity, you could have the best message in the world and you're not going to get through to people because they're going to shut off and go, they're full of shit.
Yeah, and I think Jim Rohn was Les Brown's one of his mentors or something.
And Tony Robbins as well. So, very influential in that area. But I can hear it in his drawl, in his southern drawl, like his just distinctive voice. Yeah. I've heard it so many times and it resonates with me so much, is that the people who, and even when we had Sal on here, people look for authenticity. And if you're communicating authentically and being transparent and what you say, you do. So you'll have someone, if someone's saying, listen, you talk about cheeseburgers, this health professional that I worked with was massively overweight and he used to smoke, right? And I'd talk to him about it and I go, hey, I just noticed we're working together trying to help someone's health profile. You've never mentioned this and this and this. And he looked at me, he goes, look at me. He goes, who can I give health advice to? Honestly. I'll advise them on this and this and this, but the whole area of health, eating, smoking, I never touch because I'm actually out of integrity if I do that. So I'd rather not touch it at all rather than, and I went, I can respect that. I really wish you could change it because you'll have bigger impact, but I respect you as a human when you're not telling someone to do one thing and do something else because that's contradictory. But you are clear that I don't do this, so I have no right to tell somebody else to do it.
That's why there's all these like Instagram coaches for business and lifestyle. And you're like, what have you actually done in your life? Yeah. Have you started a business or is your business just something that's online that if it fails, you spend a couple $100 on a website? Or have you gone out and gone, no, I want to employ 10 people. I want to employ 15, 20 people. I want to serve food to the whole country. I want to, get on stage and motivate people or inspire people from my experience, not just because I went to school and read a whole bunch of books. Like what builds that trust into you?
Yeah.
And, are you living congruently or are you just saying it just to make money? Yeah. And people can pick out the coaches and the mentors and all that are just in it for a buck. Yeah, not someone who's genuinely there to help.
Yeah, totally agree. So if that hasn't annoyed people, then the next level it's the financial and wealth area of life. And so it's important to sit with this one and ask yourself, what contradictions do I have in this wheelhouse? And you might initially go, well, none really. I'm pretty congruent. Okay. All right. Well, let me give you an example that may resonate with you. You might be determined to save up for a house and you scrimp and save everything. You don't go out anywhere. You don't do anything for 18 months, 2 years. And then you get really frustrated that it's not happening fast enough. So you go stuff it. And I book a US or an overseas, when you could, an overseas trip on your credit card, blow all your dough and you're back where you started.
Yeah.
So that's a contradiction, identifying why that happened. So you reacted to a particular scenario. You said that was the direction you have, but your actions contradict. And you've got to ask, well, what happened? What happened there? And yes, it might have been frustration. It might have been a whole lot of reasons. But if you're saying that this is my priority, but you're routinely, and let's just say that it's not an overseas trip, it's regularly spending money on things that aren't getting you closer to what your goal is, then your actions and your behaviors are not supporting what you said is your goal. So that's one of them, particularly within the financial and wealth one. And it's not designed to avoid people having fun, but it's just same thing. It's like, hey man, you told me this was the goal. And this comes a lot from, financial advisors, from accountants that routinely have clients who come to them from advice, who invest in a plan and don't follow the plan, and then come back and shit can the plan to say it doesn't work. It's like, we did, but you didn't work the plan. So you consequently didn't get the outcomes that you were working to because your actions were contradictory to where you told me you wanted to go.
Yeah, and I learned that through the stock market this year, because when I first started, I wanted to be a day trader. I didn't have enough money to be a day trader, so I was like a poor man's day trader. So I'd make $60 in a day from a good trade.
Yeah.
But then $30 out of that was for fees of buying and selling. So I just made $30 from a day of watching the stock market. Was that worth it?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. So what I started doing was not looking at the dividends. That's a happy byproduct for me. But I was looking at a bit more of a long-term style of investing, maybe 2 or 3 hot days, then I'll sell it. And then have that with about 4 or 5 shares. So I'm making $200 to $300 a day from holding it just a little bit longer, learning that patience rather than just, buy, sell, and just getting that quick little,
adrenaline.
I got $60. And then you're like, actually, after all the fees, all the time that I spent, probably actually lost money, not really earned money. So then I had to go back and really work on that, because I was brand new into the share market. So I had to really work on it, read books, watch YouTube videos, start understanding that, it's cool to be a day trader, but it doesn't mean literally just the day trading.
Yeah.
It might be like 2 or 3 days, or if you're going to day trade, you got to put 100,000, and that $30 product doesn't really matter that much, because you could make 60 grand in that quick trade or something like that. Yeah. So it taught me how to, research and not contradict myself by just labeling myself as a day trader when I shouldn't have been a day trader.
They're the contradictions, right? Yeah. They are contradictions where you say, yes, I'm a long-term investor, and yet you exhibit, as you said, day trading tendencies. They're contradictions. Yeah. There's a different psychology, and they both have a specific skill set. And there's nothing wrong with, if you're a day trader, and I know a lot of day traders, they're clear on who they are and what they do and how they go about that. So their strategy, their plan is congruent with a day trader. Yeah. And someone who is in there has got their own game plan, and they don't mix them up. So that's the go. So that's definitely one within the financial one. So the whole purpose, and these aren't by any means exhaustive. They're just trying to highlight that there are incongruencies and contradictions in different areas of life that show up in different ways. And as a result of that, you're going to be the effect of some outcomes that you may not necessarily want. So this is why it's important to focus on those. So the third area is relationships. And I'm going to break these up into 2 areas, Adam, because, we might have our primary relationships and then by extension family, right? And this is probably going to, like I said, I'm just gradually increasing the piss people off meter. I don't know why. I've just got this sense that it may be the case, but it's coming from a place of wanting to help people. So I see this happen all the time, and particularly I work with people I've gone and done work with on cruise. The primary relationship. So a lot of the times, and a lot of times a partner may say that this person is the most important person in my world. They're everything to me, and you identify that within your primary relationship that the person, your partner, their love language is words of affirmation. And so you know that how you speak to them is really important. And yet you regularly communicate frustration and anger in ways that is designed to hurt. So you know that you tell them that you care about them, you love them, but then you're also really harsh with them. So that gives them contradictory messages and confusion to go, hang on, I thought you said you cared about me, but how can you say that if you care about me? And, are we, and it gives, there's this push-pull scenario where people are in a scenario where their defenses are down. They're thinking, hey, you're hitting all my love language cues, and then suddenly out of left field something happens and to confuse the daylights out of people. And so that compromises trust, engagement, connection, all those kind of things. So that's contradictory messages you're giving by virtue of not having the awareness of what impact you're having. Right? That's just one example. Another example, particularly within the context of primary relationship, and these are ones that have come up, right? So I'm sharing stories of coaching clients and people that I see regularly where there's a lot of hurt that comes from them. So, for example, someone will say, and I've had this example many, many times where, and it's usually women who have come up and said, look, my partner says that they care about me the most. They want me to spend time with me, and that's really important to me. And yet every time I say, look, can we go and do something, they're so busy doing their hobby. It could be games, it could be whatever, and they prioritize that over me. And so I feel displaced, that I don't feel like I actually am that important to them. So they're getting a contradictory message where basically what you're subconsciously saying is, in a limited amount of time that I have available, I'll choose a game over you, right? So you can see how it erodes. I know it's harsh.
And then justify it by, I need downtime myself, so I need that game.
So like I said, right, I'm not making judgment on it, but we're lifting up the mirror to go, hey, are you aware that you're saying this thing, but your behaviors and actions are reflecting something else? So just in case someone turns around and says to you, I don't want to be a part of your world, let that not be a surprise to you, because you weren't prioritizing them as you said that you were going to.
Yeah.
Right? So that's really hard. And that's like, it shows up all the time. What qualifies me to say it is that I see it happen all the time. And it's hard and harsh, but it's a reality.
It's one of those things as well, when you're driving to a certain part of your life, you want to get to a certain level, you want to do something. Some of these things just get neglected, and you don't necessarily mean for it to happen. You say you want to spend that time, you say you want to do stuff, but sometimes you're so focused on the end result, you start forgetting about other stuff. But then when questioned about it, you're like, oh no, I spend time with you. What are you talking about? Where you spend, this amount of time every day together. And you're like, yeah, you're present in a room, but you're not spending time with me. And that's where, the contradictions come in. Just because you're sitting in the same room doesn't mean you're present with that person, you're having a conversation. Doesn't mean you've always got to sit down and intensely have a purposeful conversation, but it's just like, hey, how was your day? And, what did you get up to? Was there anything like that you would like to replay? And actually just talk. And then if you do that for half an hour, I'm sure most partners wouldn't mind that you go play a game for half an hour, because you've actually been present, and then now you get your own downtime as well. So there's ways to work around it. Even though you're being very driven, you can factor in different ways to do these things.
Things are called agreements, right?
Yeah.
You can have agreements, and that's what it will be. And that's a big lesson that I've learnt over time is, as long as you have agreements, everybody's satisfied, everybody's happy. But it's when you compromise, you say you're going to do one thing, but you don't, it's when you really create hurt and pain for somebody. And so specifically, I want to talk about it from the family context, because this shows up a lot too. And, having two sons, I was really acutely aware of this, because growing up, I hardly ever saw my dad. He was always working, and they were the circumstances, and they were the situations. And I've been fortunate that I didn't have to do what he had to do to be able to provide for my family. So total disclosure in that regard. But growing up, I made a decision that whenever my kids were going to play sport, I was going to be there. And so when they were getting older and they started to play sport, I used to work Saturday mornings, and I had to make a really difficult decision, because it cost me a lot of money, because that was really important to me. So I went, okay, I'm not working Saturdays. And Saturdays at the time, particularly in practice, was a massively busy day. And to walk away from that, to drive my kids from sporting event to sporting event, was a difficult decision to make. But I knew it was the right one, because it had created so much hurt for me. And so, and I get that a lot of times people don't have that option, and neither my family didn't. but I did. So I made that decision. And if I'd said that it hurt me and I was never going to do that and I still did it, then that's the contradiction. Not that, it's different if you have to and you work out a way of organizing time differently and honor all those agreements. But that was almost like a unbroken rule that I was going to have, and I did it. And for 6 years, I didn't work on a Saturday, up until the point where my kids went, okay, we don't need you being here anymore. And so I remember there was one session that one game that I couldn't be at a game with one of my sons, Xavier, and I was really cut up about it. I was really bad, and I said, "Mate, I'm really sorry." And he said, "Hey, listen, Dad, just to be clear, like, I'm really grateful that you're there, but you don't have to be there, and like, you're now being there for you than for me." So, and that was like a really big, oh, geez, I wanted to be there for every one of them. And when they tell you we don't need you here anymore, that was liberating in that regard. But when they stopped playing sport, then I went, okay, well, now I've got that time available and I'll dedicate it to it. But that was a big contradiction that I had to reconcile for me.
Yeah, so when I was working at the bakery, it was 24/7 business. And even though I wasn't physically there for 24/7, I didn't have my mind turned off. So during the nights, even if I was sleeping, I was still not getting good rest, because I knew that if something happened, I've got the liability on my head. Then on the weekends, if someone couldn't turn up, I would turn up. And, weekends is when generally everyone has a party. So sometimes people would say they were sick and they just go to a party instead. And I couldn't get any relaxation time. And coming from an immigrant family, we were used to working 7 days a week, and that was the normal. And now that I've got the ability, kind of like what you were just saying, now that I've got the ability to set my times and my hours, we were having the conversation this week because I'm looking at going to a bigger factory. And I've had the conversation with a few people, and I'm like, I've got one oven. I'm really restricted with my power. I can't produce more than what I'm doing. And they're like, you can't or you won't? And I go, well, I can't. And they go, well, you can do night shift or you can come in on Saturdays and Sundays. I go, if you want to do it, you can come in. But I'm not doing that. And no one in my business is doing that. If you want to use my facility, you can use my facility, but I'm not going to be here. And my staff aren't going to be here because I don't want to be liable for anything that's happening. And then they're like, oh, what? I go, well, firstly, I don't have a family in terms of kids. But if I did, I want to be with them. And not immigrant families, we do what we have to do when we come here. And I worked weekends for years before any of this. But I'm getting to that point where I'm comfortable to say, you know what, Saturdays and Sundays are off. And one of my staff goes, oh, I need to do some preparation. Can I do it on the Saturday? I go, no, no one's here on Saturdays. And they're like, oh, I go, you can do it, but I'm not liable for anything that happens because all my staff have a key to the building because I trust everyone. You come into my business, I'm going to trust you. And it might sound reckless, but it builds a level of connectivity. And I go, you can come, but I'm not liable for anything that happens. So then my dad went in. I'm like, Dad, don't get them in the habit of doing this because I know that we could be there really, but I don't want to build a business or a lifestyle that I have to work every second of every day. And some people just don't understand that. And they go, but you've got a business. And I go, well, that's not my priority. That's what I do. My priority is my family or growing myself or helping other people. And limiting my contact work hours gives me the ability to help more people or to experience life a bit more. And that's where my priority is. Yeah. So I've got to be congruent with that goal that I've set. As you said, with being at your son's sporting events, I've got to live a life like that.
And like I said, that's not telling people how to live. It's basically, if you've decided that that's a priority for you, your actions have to support that.
Yeah.
Your actions and behaviors have to support that. Otherwise, there's a contradiction and you're not congruent. Simple as that. It's not right or wrong. It's just, it is. Just that's because you're contradicting what you're saying is a priority.
And you might think that it sounds okay when you say it's not congruent, and it might not sound like anything today or next week, but 3 or 6 months down the track when you're going, hey, I actually did say that and I'm not doing it. That's when you start distrusting yourself. And that's when you start really hurting yourself mentally and emotionally, because you're like, I'm not living that life that I hoped for. That's where people have breakdowns or they get anxiety. Oh, it was supposed to be so much more different to what it is. And they start playing that mental game. So as long as you can be congruent and don't contradict yourself, you build that trust and that confidence, and you can approach any situation and you go, all right, I haven't been in this situation before, but I've built up a whole bunch of positive energy leading up to this. So just let me at it.
Yeah.
And if
that's the whole basis of that.
yeah, and then what happens is if you fail, you're like, well, I failed, but now I've learned a new course. But you still come in with a positive mentality and being confident and congruent, and you don't contradict yourself. Don't emotionally beat yourself before you've reached a task or whatnot.
No, good.
Well, next one's personal growth.
Well, then the next area which is along the lines of what we touched on as well too, is the next area particularly is about your own personal growth and spirituality. So contradictions show up a lot in this area, and by that, what I'm going to give you an example is you know within your own personal growth. Let's just say that you're responsible for team and employees, and someone comes to you and makes a particular mistake or a particular decision that reflects fear, a doubt, uncertainty, and they bring it to your attention and you chew them out, right? Totally chew them out for that. And yet later in that day, when faced with a similar issue, you have acted exactly the same way, but you don't accept that level of feedback is appropriate for you as well. So the contradiction is not so much the challenge. The contradiction is that you have expectations of others that you're not prepared to actually uphold yourself. That's the contradiction. And that confuses people where, particularly within the work culture, people will say, hey, you know, I can't get away with that. How is it that you're getting away with that? Or you're telling me that this is how we have to behave and act, and yet you're behaving differently and contradictory to what we thought was the establishment of the culture.
Yeah, and I find this happens a lot in politics, not going down the left or the right side, but it's a lot of the time it's the person who you support or you vote for, they do something that's questionable and you defend them, even though you still feel like it's, you know, it's a little bit questionable. But there's a simple thing that you should do. If the opposition, the other person that you voted for, was in that position and they made the exact same decision, would you be defending it?
You'd maul them. Yeah.
You'd maul them, exactly. Yeah. And that's what I find really funny about politics is just because it's my guy or my girl.
It's your footy team.
Yeah, same, yeah.
Your footy player, you know, someone knocks somebody out and they're wearing your colours.
You're like, yeah.
You go, well, okay, that was a good hit.
Yeah.
But if it's on your bloke, you go, that dog, that was a
They should be reported, send them off. Like it's, yeah. So it's funny how, you know, if it's your team, you just like, you embrace it. But that's one of the biggest things about the lockdowns that we had in Victoria. That was so severe and so harsh. And I go, if it was the opposite party who did it, how would you react to this? And a lot of people, they don't know how to respond because they realize that they're, you know, they're contradicting themselves, because if it was someone else, they would be reacting completely different. I was reacting to the situation. I wasn't reacting to that person himself. That being said, I'm not his biggest fan, but I was more appalled the fact that we had businesses locked down and closed, and the small guys were closed, but the big guys were open. That's where the contradiction came, and that's what I was upset about most. It wasn't the person or the party specifically. Yeah,
well, that's a great application with regard to business. And what about in religion, right? And spirituality. This is the one. This part
can of worms.
It is, and we're just going to rein it in really closely. But part of the reason why organised religion is losing people in droves is the contradictions that are there. We're basically and the principles are basically loving, but the application of how people interpret those is what's creating a lot of disconnect for people, and why they're drawn to basically look for different answers. Because, you know, people rock up on the day of faith,
Yeah.
whether it's a Saturday, Sunday, and for a period of time, they're living the principles of their religion.
Yeah.
And at the moment they've gone, they're out the door. They don't exemplify those principles. So there's an incongruency and contradictory messages. People go, hey, I thought you were this person. I thought you subscribed to this way of thinking or this faith. But I'm just confused because these are the principles and where are you living those? So it's contradictory. So then it doesn't matter what you proclaim about yourself. It's how you're living your life that is actually speaking so loudly that you don't even realize.
With the Lebanese church, I'm not a religious guy. I'm going to say this from the outset. I believe there's something out there. I haven't found it. I'm on that journey. That's a path for me to find. I'm not super religious, but you go to the Lebanese church and people pull up in their hotted up cars and they've got their Versace and their Gucci on and they turn up to church because they want to flash. Whereas the church is more of a humble place of worship, and you're there to learn core principles and how to treat everyone the same and no judgment. But you go there to be judged because you got the best cars and the best, and then how much you put into the charity box. And I heard that a lot of churches have got more money now in the charity box because they were doing lives, so people could see how much donations were coming in. So it was becoming almost like a point of pride, and they're like, oh, I donated $50 today, but they only donated $20. It shouldn't be a gauge like this. And that's why, I always find it funny when I see
there
people,
are massive
people not.
incongruencies there, and some of my greatest friends.
I'm not bashing the religion. Don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing it.
No. It's
just the mentalities.
Part of it, for me, I have respect for people who are live the principles.
Yeah.
And live the principles 7 days a week. That's to me irrespective. And I have friends who are on different religious spectrums and deliver religious paths and deliver different denominations, and I trust them because they live congruently with the principles of their faith.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm talking about. And this is the what I wanted to basically highlight is the contradiction that happens where we say that. Because there was this study, right? There was years ago, there was this study that was done where they went to basically where they were training priests, a priesthood. And there was a lecture that was being run on compassion, love, and fellow man or whatever it was. And they had actors in the courtyard leading up to the lecture, begging help, asking for help or whatever. And the people who were going to compassionate classes were walking over these people because they're running late to get to class.
Yeah.
And it was the deliberate strategy to go, okay, so where are people congruent? And a scarily small number of people actually acted what they were taught. So they're off to a class that's about compassion and love, and yet it was right in front of them. They wouldn't do it. That's a contradiction.
Yeah.
They're the kind of things. And I remember one time there was, on another example, when we were hiring someone for a role, and we wanted to, we put in the ad, we're looking for someone who's people-centric, who's focused, who's caring. That's the kind of attributes we have. And this person was like 20 minutes late for an interview. And we were like, okay, well, that doesn't bode very well for you. And so that doesn't look really good. Okay, we'll scrap this person off the list. She came in and she says, listen, I'm really sorry. I know it doesn't look very well good for me, but here's the thing. I was driving and I saw this bird hit by a car, and I stopped and basically made sure the bird was okay, and I took it to a vet and on my way to the interview here. So I'm really sorry, and you probably won't hire me, but I just want you to know why it happened. And we went, you exemplified exactly what we're looking for by your actions. And that wasn't contradictory. So that's really, I guess that's the big key thing that I'm talking about is look for consistency in message and action with what the core principle and value is that you're talking about.
Well, I've seen as well in a lot of religions it says you shall not be the one that judges. The judgment comes in your final days or whatever. or
That we
after
make a judgment. Yeah.
And so many people judge people's actions. Why did they do this? Why did they do that? And they start hyping stuff up, or they really judge them for an action they've done. And it's like, but you're not a person. Your religion, you live that religious life. You preach it. You say you should turn up to church or mosque or whatever. You should do your. It's hard to talk because I don't want to offend anyone. I'm just saying.
I think we've probably offended a whole lot of people who are along the lines, but not from the intention of bagging out their path, but asking them, where in your life are you not congruent with what is important and what you said is important and a priority? That's it.
Yeah,
and religion is one of the biggest areas of incongruency that I know.
Yeah, because people that they, as you said, they live it and breathe it, and they want to, especially the vocal ones, the people who live it and breathe it. I've got some family who live it and breathe it, and then they'll sit there and judge people for stuff, and I just call them out on it a lot of the time. And it's not because I don't want them to be religious. Everyone has their journey, everyone has their path, and everyone has their comforts. But don't judge other people because they're not so similar to you. That's why I like to sit down and actually talk to some people and just go, but why did you make that decision? And try and understand it without judgments. And a lot of people have said to me, it's really easy speaking to you. I go, because I don't judge you. We're all on a journey. I've made 100 million mistakes. If I get judged every time, I would never want to be in a public eye. I would never want to do something. I would never want to put myself out there. So I want to take the respect that I've had in the past and pass it on and go, hey, please explain your actions because I don't want to judge you. Sometimes, and I think that was one of the biggest things when I was coaching with you. I said, I want to remove as much judgment as possible. But then there's a point where you remove too much and then you start accepting everyone into your life that shouldn't always be in your life. So it's a tough situation.
We talk about boundaries.
Yeah,
right? So
that's the boundary.
There's another factor as well. So that was, look, I think we need to move on.
Yeah.
And that was a big, heavy part of it, which is really great that we're moving to the next point, which is of contradiction, which is in the area of fun and recreation. And this is an area that I find for most business people and entrepreneurs is an area of contradiction, because they say that, look, I love what I do. I love being of service to people. People are, I love being able to make a difference in people's worlds and life, and yet you treat your customers poorly, harshly, rudely, etc. So there's a contradiction in that scenario, which is really important. You get into a health space to help people, to help humanity, and yet you only do it when it's convenient to you.
Yeah.
You only do it not because of the greater good or the compassion people, but for your own needs.
Yeah. And it's tough when you're doing it for business senses as well, because you want to be as true as possible, but sometimes it's not viable. But as long as you communicate your message and go, hey, this is the situation at the moment. We'd love to donate a lot more of our profits and stuff like this, but we can't at this time. Stay with us, because in the future, as we were saying in the last our last podcast when we were saying paying it forward, if you take 10 cents of the dollar, so you go, hey, this is our foundation that we want to support and all this, we will get there. But right now we're doing our startup costs. But once we hit 1 million subscribers or something, then we'll start donating as much as possible to charity or whatever. It's I don't know.
But see, it's a really important thing you're saying. So there are congruencies in terms of what you're doing in there. I used it as an example to say about, okay, there's fun, this is what we do. And it's quite relevant that I bring this up here because Zappos, which is a company in the US, is an organization who are notorious for fun. Like, they make the environment and culture so much fun. Tony Hsieh just recently died, the owner of that, which is really sad, because a lot of people really benefited from, the example, the way he went about things. But if you say that you're creating an environment of fun and you're snappy, the culture is toxic, there's contradictions in that. And so consequently, your people won't have trust in you, won't have enjoyment. The turnover is going to be really high. They're not going to have buy-in, all those things. So if you make a fun and recreation, honoring people's family time is really important, then how you go about communicating that message is really important to the people that work in your environment.
Yeah. I've made a rule at work as well that if I'm not in a good mood, I try and stay off the production floor.
Mm-hmm.
And then I work on it and I know when I'm not in a good mood, but I might sit down, reflect, and then might listen to a song or two before I go onto the production floor. But I don't want to ever sort of drag down the energy just because the boss is on the production floor, everyone starts tightening up. That's not what I want to do. So I always try and enforce to have fun. And if my staff want to listen to their type of music, or they want to listen to, sometimes my staff watch movies on their phones, and as long as the work's getting done, I don't mind. But I've seen other bosses in the same industry that they won't put music on in the production floor because it could be dangerous, or they'll set the music. They don't want to set anyone else to set the music. But then you're building out the fun. And work is not pleasant at the best of times. Like if you're just working for a boss, sometimes you're not fulfilled. You're just doing it because you need the job and the money. So if I can do something that makes you enjoy your time a bit more, like you watch a movie while you're packing cakes that you've packed for the past 3 years, you know the process. It's become second nature to you. You don't have to think actively all the time on this. So if you want to watch a movie and you can do it while being safe, do it. But that way we keep the fun and the enjoyment in the job, because to put a piece of cake in a machine for 5 days straight for 3 years, it can be tolling on you.
Yeah, so that's got to be built in.
Yeah,
right? It's got to be built in. And obviously what I'm taking out of what you're saying is you're building in measures to support people to have enjoyment and fun in the environment. And it'd be different if you were up watching movies yourself and then cracking the whip, not allowing somebody else to enjoy elements of it. So that's a contradiction, right? So if they could see the party's going on in there and you look like you're having all this amount of fun, and yet they're deprived of some things that would make their environment fun, then that's the contradiction in the message. And so consequently they go, well, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
Cool. So Adam, this is point number 6, and this is our last one in terms of areas of life, is I really want to have a look at contribution, because this is one that shows up for a lot of people, the incongruencies and the contradictions for people, is because whether it's contribution can be of your time or money. And a lot of the times people will talk about, no one's there to help me. No one will give me any support. No one, I'm moving house and I've called 55 people and no one can make it that day. Sometimes you got to ask why, because sometimes, you never put yourself out there in the first place. You weren't the person who contributed. And the contradiction will be you're asking, it's a universal law. You want to take, but you're not actually prepared to give. And so the people that I have found are the greatest receivers are the ones who are usually the greatest givers first. And so consequently, if there's any support they require, they need, all they've got to do is ask, and people fall over themselves to help out. But if you're constantly out of exchange with the universal law of giving and you only want to take, then you're going to there's a contradiction in what you're expecting of other people that you're not prepared to give in yourself. So consequently, your requests are going to come to zip, and understandably so. And you need to understand why that's the case, why people aren't bending over backwards to help you, because you never put yourself out there to help anybody else.
Yep.
And that was probably the final slap that's going to happen for a lot of people. But it's so true. In the world of givers and takers, the givers are the ones, there's research. Adam Grant is a professor, I can't remember, Wharton Business School, I think. And he has this study where they have shown that the givers, the people are in there, basically get so much more benefit and outcome than people who are just takers. And so it's a universal law. Follow it and it'll work well for you. Don't follow it and basically live in contradiction to it, and you'll keep coming up with the same outcomes and results.
Yeah, and this is what you see, and I'm I'm sometimes cynical about homeless people, and that's going to sound terrible, but I was in Fitzroy for 15 years, and there was genuinely homeless people that I saw, and we would feed and we would look after. And then there was the makeshift homeless people that we saw down at the bottle shop buying beers with all the monies that they got, and they just started laughing with their mates. How much money did you sucker them in today? And so then there was the real homeless that you'd sit down and you'd talk to them and you go, hey, what's been happening? And they love that more than, you just dropping $5 and walking off. Like, they wanted to be heard. They wanted their story. They wanted to feel some human connection. And that's where contribution comes in. If you sit down and listen to people's stories, sometimes that's more than the money donations. You don't always have to just throw money. And this happens in relationships a lot. Oh, I can't be there. It could be family or it could be primary, but I can't be there. So here's $100, just have fun, go watch a movie or, catch up, go shopping, and I'll see you later tonight or whatever. But sometimes the time is more important than the actual financial reward or gift. So contribution is, I don't know. You talked about compassion, and I think contribution and compassion are very, very similar.
Well, it is, because contribution is not just giving money, it's giving of self.
Yeah.
And of giving of self quite often is your time and energy. And that quite often, as you said, speaks volumes, and it really supports and helps a lot. So that's quite often a bigger measure. That's kind of like the underlying thing that is a human need, and that is that of connection. So it shows up in that regard a lot.
And you don't have to, obviously, you don't have to contribute to people because you pity them or because you feel sorry for them. It's, as Jim said, you want to be a giver, because giving more, you receive more. And it doesn't mean you give just to get back. But giving more, it fills your cup firstly. And if something comes back around through karma, through whatever, if something comes back around to you in the universe, it's because you've given out so much.
Yep.
It's just that positive cycle.
Universal law.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
So let's start rounding this up. So some three key summaries of key points that we covered, and then some action steps, and we're done. So number one, contradictions may show up in the way you think, act, and communicate, which may have a massive impact and effect in both your business and life. Pretty self-explanatory in terms of what we focus on there as well. Point number two, that when you have contradictions, it may cause you to lose trust in yourself, in others, may lose trust in you as well. And point number three, identifying and reconciling these contradictions is an empowering process, because it can accelerate you in your business, lead you to a high level of joy and fulfillment in your life as well. So that's the payoffs of reconciling these contradictions. It's not for anybody else. It actually really is for yourself. And it's an empowering process when you follow that and progress with that. So to finish off our podcast, there's some action steps if you choose to take on board, which will help you solidify what we've spoken about today. And number one is to review the area of life mentioned above, areas of life, I should say, above, and see if there are any contradictions that show up for you. Now, point number two, if you're reviewing yourself, and this is going to be really, really powerful in there, is imagine you are viewing yourself from a dissociated place. And what I mean by that is, imagine you're watching yourself outside of yourself, and ask yourself to identify any specific contradictions you have in your life. So if you imagine you were watching a movie of you, and you were looking at how you're behaving and then what you said was important, sometimes it's easier to identify it when you're outside of yourself. And that's why it's quite often easier to see someone else do it, but then not see it in yourself. So if you dissociate, you'll be able to better identify the contradictions that are in self. Point number three is ask yourself, what impact these contradictions are having. Remember the example I used about the Anthony Robbins seminar and the Dickens process, where you take yourself future pacing it and look at the impact. So be honest with yourself. What impact is that having on you in terms of your joy, your happiness, your financial impact, your connection with other people? What impact is that having? And point number four, if you have identified specific areas there are contradiction in, what are two or three things that you could do today that would start the process of reconciling these contradictions? This is about you taking control. This is not about somebody else telling you what to do, but it's about you taking steps to clear parts that aren't serving you and start embracing behaviors and actions that actually will move you forward in the direction you want to go. Adam, any final comments or thoughts for you before we're done?
I've already started reflecting on that. I've gone into a different
I
zone.
can see
I've gone into a different.
It's setting you in this finger loop and stuff. So
I've just started thinking about I haven't done enough contribution lately. I've got to do more, and I've just started focusing on that. I've already written a plan in my mind, and
well, that's awesome because that's if there's one person that is impacted by what we're talking about today. Awesome, that's great. And then sometimes it's you and I. Even while we're recording, we're like, "Holy smoke! I think I need to do this," or I've now got an awareness about where I need to put my focus and energy, and that's in the process. We're living it as we're going through it as well. So that's definitely the case. So
yeah, so that's as I said earlier, like when I was teaching martial arts, I was learning just as much as the students that I was teaching because I was starting to understand the concepts way more. And yeah, this has been a good one. And I will sit down because even before we started talking about this, I was saying about the drinking and the health side, and it's something I want to focus on. So I will actually sit down and go over the list that we were just talking about because it's given me a second point of view with you coming over and saying, hey, look at this and this, and it's opened my mind. Right. So thank you.
Great. Well, it was fun recording this once again with you, Adam, and want to thank all our listeners for joining us once again on the podcast. This is just a reminder that you can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and the Extended Launch and Beyond community on these channels. Now, please post any questions or comments you have about the podcast or anything you'd like support with. Quite often, your thoughts and questions are the same ones others have, but nobody comes forward to share them and ask for it. So you're doing everybody a great favor if you put some content or information in a public forum that we can expand and grow on. And finally, if you're enjoying the podcast and finding value in it, we'd be grateful if you could go over to iTunes and leave us a review. This allows us to have a greater impact and reach more people. So from me, thank you. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.